Hi everyone, it's Laura here and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video I'm going to share some tips to create a masked scene and how to make the masking process fail-proof. For the card I am sharing today, I used the My Favorite Things Fold Friends, and the idea was that this adorable little girl would be the focal point on my card, and I wanted to create a sort of a swoosh of wind and leaves whirling around her in order to draw the eye of the viewers towards her. Because I didn't want to stamp directly on my nice paper in case I didn't like the composition, I started by planning my scene on some copy paper that I cut at 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. So I started by stamping the girl and a bunch of leaves on the right third of this panel. And then with a pencil I started drawing a line to define the area where I wanted the wind whirl to be. The idea was for it to start on the bottom left of the card and expand towards the right side before revolving around the girl. Once I was happy with the way that looked, I started stamping my leaves. I used 2 of the leaves in the Fold Friends stamp set, and also later on I will bring in one smaller leaf from the Happy Hedgehog stamp set, also by My Favorite Things. And I am stamping them one by one, following the line that I had drawn. And the reason why I created this card is to participate in the My Favorite Things Card Design Superstar 2018 edition. I had played along last year too, and I also had a video for one of the cards that I created. I will link it here on the top right of the screen. This card here in particular is for the Clean and Simple Genius Challenge. And even if I don't really feel that clean and simple is where my strength lies, I really had a lot of fun in trying to create an interesting and different design for my standards anyway. So these challenges are always a great occasion to sort of stretch our creative muscles and try new things. Coming back to the card, once my scene was all stamped, I could go ahead and create some masks. I stamped the image of the little girl and the image with the bunch of leaves on some repositionable packaging labels, and I trimmed them out with my scissors. And after that was done, I could go ahead and actually start working on my card. I took some Nina Desert Storm cardstock cut at 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, so exactly the same size as my copy paper panel, and I positioned it in the lower right corner of my Misty. I then took my stamped copy paper piece and I lay it directly on top, using the corners of the Misty to align the 2 sheets exactly. And I am basically using this pre-stamped scene as a guide to help me position each stamp. So what I will do is I will position the stamp overlaying it with the stamped image on my copy paper. I will pick it up with the lid of my Misty, remove the copy paper and stamp the image on my card. I stamped the bunch of leaves first, as that will be in the foreground, and I used Memento Dewdrops in Rich Cocoa. I then applied the mask directly on the stamped image and took again the piece of copy paper where I had my scene pre-stamped. And this time I am using it to position the girl exactly as I want. I can then remove the copy paper, ink up my stamp and stamp it on my card base. I will repeat the same position for all the leaves, and that was the part of this card design that was more difficult to plan out and for which this tip with the pre-stamped copy paper scene is really useful. And actually you will see that I decided to correct the positioning of some of the leaves as I went. I could have also decided to recreate another scene that I felt was more balanced, but at that stage I sort of had an idea of how I wanted the final result to look like, so I felt I could go ahead and correct my stamping directly as I was creating the card. It is totally up to you which approach you would prefer to use, but I think that this masking technique is really helpful in terms of making your stamping seamless and fail-proof. After I stamped all the leaves, I also went ahead and stamped the sentiment directly. And to be completely honest, I wish I hadn't, because I think that the design would have looked even better if the sentiment was placed just above the left portion of the wind world, so a little bit lower down on the card. But I realized this once I was done with the coloring already, and I had spent so much time on this card that I didn't want to start over, and I still think that the result is really cute and I definitely enjoyed creating it, which for me is the most important part anyway. Once all the stamping was done, all I had to do was to remove the masks and start coloring. And this time I decided to use my Prismacolor pencils, as I think they look really great on Nina Desert Storm cardstock, especially for fall cards. As a first step, I started by using a white pencil to outline the areas where I have my wind whirl, and I am not filling it flat as you can see, but I am rather creating some strokes to add texture and give the feeling that this is actually wind. I started by defining the edges of this area, and then I am filling it in with short strokes, and I will keep going ahead until I'm happy with the result. I then started coloring the face of the little girl, and I am adding my shadows as if the light is coming from the top left of the screen, so that the shadows will be mostly focused on the bottom right of her face, and there will also be a shadow cast by the scarf and a shadow cast by the hat. And I am slowly building up my color and working in layers until I get the depth and definition that I'm going for. I thought initially that I would first color the little girl entirely, but then I realized that in order for me to be able to pick a nice color palette for her outfit, it would have been better if I had the rest of the elements colored in. And this is because with the leaves and the pumpkin, I didn't really have a lot of choice, in the sense that the pumpkin was going to be orange, and I had decided to color in the leaves in shades of greens and muted reds and oranges. So I thought I had a better chance at picking an appealing color combination for the girl's clothes if I could already see how the other elements looked once they were colored. So once I was done coloring the little girl's face, I moved directly to color in the leaves. And as I said, for that I used muted greens, reds and oranges. And I will not show you the entire coloring process for this card, otherwise the video would be really long. I do have still the footage, so in case you'd like to see that, please let me know. It's not a problem to upload it. Probably I will do it with a little bit of music in the background, sort of as a speed coloring video. But for this video right here, I will show you the coloring for each color combination that I used. So for example, I have one color combination for the greens, and I use that on the leaves, and I will show you the coloring for just one leaf, and the rest is sort of the same. And I will share these color combinations on my blog in the form of a color chart, like the ones that I have been sharing lately. And please do let me know if you enjoy those color charts and if you find them a good complement to the videos, or if you prefer the colors to be printed on screen, or whichever your preference is. Share it with me in the comments below. Once I was done coloring the leaves, I moved on to the pumpkin, and for that I am using shades of oranges and browns, and again I am shading each portion as if the light is coming from the top left of the screen. And probably it's hard to tell from the video because it is so sped up, but for this card I really took my time. With the coloring I did it slowly and relaxedly, and the important thing with Prismacolors is to work in layers. So you want to start with a very light hand, placing your shadows and your highlights where they belong. And then you can build up intensity and sort of smoothen out the colors by adding subsequent layers. If you start with a very hard pressure from the beginning, you will flatten out the tooth of the paper and you will not be able to build up as many layers and therefore to achieve the same color depth. And it's also more straining for your hands, so that's another reason why you want to really take your time with Prismacolor pencils. And granted, they are more time consuming than Copics, for example, or alcohol markers, but what I really like is that they sort of force me to sit back and take my time. So this card for me was a really relaxing process and a perfect example of crafting therapy. Once the background was all colored in, I could pick my color palette for the girl's outfit, and I decided to use a cool palette made up of blues and purples, still not very bright colors, because I thought this would make the little girl stand out against the warm background even more. I decided to color her coat blue, and I also added some cold grays to deepen the shadows and mute out the colors even more. The shadows themselves would be on the bottom right areas of her coat, and there would also be some cast shadows created by the scarf. Also in this case I am working slowly and building up my depth by adding more layers, and I am starting with the darker colors and blending them out towards the highlight using lighter and lighter pencils. And I will not show it in the video, but I used the same blue color combination to color in the little girl's hat as well as her boots. For the scarf I used some muted purples, and I am placing the shadows on the bottom right areas of the scarf and also where the scarf is tucked around itself, and in any areas where there is an overlap between the flaps of the scarf. I am also accentuating the folds that were drawn in by the artist to get some extra detail. And I also used the same color combination for her skirt and her gloves. These purples that I am using here are pretty warm, which means they have quite a bit of red inside them. And for a little bit of contrast, I decided to color in her stockings with some lilac kind of purples, so a cooler shade of purple because it contains more blue. And I think all these elements play really nicely together, and the contrast with the warm palette that I have going on in the background makes this little girl stand out a lot. And while with the coat I used some cool grays to deepen the shadows, for this purple over here, because it is a warmer tone, I used instead my warm gray, and that's the 90% warm gray, by the way. For her hair I used some shades of brown, and I quickly drew in some flicks on the strands that are coming out of her hat and also on her braid. And again you will find the list of all the colors that I used in the color chart that I will share on my blog, which you can find linked in the description box down below, and there you will also have the list of all the products that I used for today's card. The last element that I need to color is the leaf on this little girl's hands, And for that I used the same green color combination that I had used on the other green leaves, but I also brought in one extra shade of green, which is significantly brighter than the others, for this leaf to stand out a little bit more. And even though the effect in the end is subtle, I think it does make a difference and adds an extra touch to the coloring. Once the coloring was done, I took a brown Prismacolor pencil and very slowly and very carefully traced the stamp lines on the girl, on the pumpkin and on the bunch of leaves, as the lines were muted because of all the layers of Prismacolor pencils that I had added on top. I did the same thing on the sentiment, but I decided not to do it on the leaves blown by the wind, so that they would stay a little bit further back on the background and all the emphasis would really be on the focal point of this card. As a final touch, I added some light shading under the leaves to ground the image a little bit more. I mounted my card on an A2 top folding card base, and that finished off my card. And you can see how the design and the colors play together and help draw the eye of the viewer towards the focal image on this card. And that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments below, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. You can visit my blog for the full list of supplies, and I'll catch you guys soon with the next one. Ciao!